All right, let's talk Illinois. This game, of course, was 9-6, much different Illinois situation last year as they won the game with one of the top defenses in the country, lost most of those players. Not Johnny Newton, though. He's still around. We got Sonny Verma here from Illini Cast. Let me pronounce that with the right phonetics there. Illini Cast for Sonny. And Sonny, as we lead you into this, I'm going to tell you that I just gushed over John Paddock 2 weeks ago. I just thought this was remarkable.
Yeah.
To be down to Minnesota, you're down to your last play. It's 4th and 11. Your quarterback's laying on the field, hurt, Luke Altmaier. It's 4th and 11. You're at your own 15-yard line. And he trots onto the field completely cold, throws a dart to Isaiah Williams, first down. 2 plays later, he's gunning a 46-yarder down the seam to win the game. Like, that's incredible. Now he throws for 507 yards last week. What's going on with this guy?
And the best part is a lot of people don't really know his background story. And it's one of those stories that makes you kind of just fall in love with sports. His great-grandfather, he played for the Illini. His grandfather played for the Illini. His uncle played for the Illini. He went to school in Michigan, but there's pictures of him in blue and orange jackets and backpacks. He just was never quite big enough to earn that scholarship from a Power 5 team. So essentially he got a scholarship offer from Ball State. He sat on the bench for 4 years. He was finally able to start his last year. He was able to start, put up decent numbers for a MAC quarterback. Nothing that exactly jumped out at you. But then this past offseason, our backup quarterback, Art Sikowski, decided to take a job as a graduate assistant instead of prolonging his college football career. Probably the right call. Brett Bielema essentially gave John Paddock a phone call and said, "Hey, we don't have a scholarship available, but we know, you have a family legacy here. If you would like to come on, we have a battle for our backup quarterback spot." I mean, he said starting quarterback spot as well, but it was kind of, pretty much assured that Luke Altmaier would win that job. So Paddock's story with Illinois, it's, again, his whole family table's got something to say, a different Illinois story. And he came in that awful Luke Altmaier game where he had 4 interceptions against Penn State, and Paddock looked clueless. He looked like he had never played D1 football in his life. So as you're talking about, when he comes in at the end of this Minnesota game where we need to score on that drive to win the game, I'm ready to turn it off. I'm so frustrated. But he goes 3 for 3, 86 yards. He graded the highest PFF grade in history of college football. And then he follows it up with that performance last Saturday. It's one of those things. If you watch any interviews with the guy, he's always got a smile. He's got a certain level of confidence, and I don't want to call it cockiness because that gives it a bad connotation, but you can tell he feels like he's so blessed to be in the position that he's in, and he's wearing the blue and orange, the colors he'd been wearing since high school, about the team that he'd been hearing about from his family his entire life. There's no man more on top of the world right now than John Paddock.
Well, Sonny, I want to make sure that we don't have a whole lot of time. We want to make sure we do this matchup justice. So I'll throw it to Corey in regards to what he wants to know about Illinois football and maybe their best path to victory here. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. You mentioned it earlier, Mark, 9-6 a year ago. And Sonny, that was probably the low point of Iowa's 2022 campaign. They had a chance to win the West still heading into the final game of the year. But man, that 9-6 game, that was as busy of a post-game show as I've ever had, with people who were just absolutely ready to be done with the Ferentz era. And I don't think that had anything to do directly with the linkage to Brett Bielema, but I'm a big Brett Bielema fan, for the record. Mark knows this. And of course, Bielema is an Iowa guy. In fact, he was brought up a couple times during today's press conference with Kirk, partly because he's coaching this game. And the other part is because Iowa's going to be honoring a bunch of seniors on Saturday, who a lot of those guys have had similar stories to what Brett did while he was at Iowa. And so I got a lot of respect for Brett Bielema. I know Kirk does as well. And let's not forget, I mean, the one guy we didn't bring up, I mean, you talk about Witherspoon being drafted in the first round of the draft last year. Tommy DeVito, is he not playing? Isn't he like starting right now in the league, or at least he did a week or two ago?
Yeah.
Yep, he was the starting quarterback for the Giants last Sunday.
So, I mean, it makes sense to an extent why Illinois is kind of taking a step back, but absolutely. I mean, Paddock, who would have expected that? And offensively, you would expect if a Brett team is going to take a step back, it'd be offensively, but it appears like they've done a pretty good job developing that room. And I know Art Sitkowski transferred in from Rutgers and just kind of didn't work out, I guess, but dealt with some injuries. Didn't he have a shoulder injury or something at some point as well? So, but yeah, I'm excited to see. I think particularly the biggest thing for me to watch is how the Illinois defensive backfield plays against Deacon Hill, because last week, Hill finally broke through. And I don't know how much of Iowa football you watched, Sonny, but man, we've had week after week after week of 30 yards passing, 40 yards passing, and it's not like Iowa's tearing it up on the ground. But finally, last week they achieved some semblance of balance on the offensive side of things. And I know maybe Illinois' defensive backfield took a little bit of a step back last year with Witherspoon being drafted, but that's still I perceive that as a pretty good unit, and I would expect Brett and that staff to have those guys ready. Deacon Hill does not. One thing that concerns me for Iowa fans, this is something that I brought up to Coach Patterson before. Deacon Hill does not have that grooved, kind of repeatable throwing motion. And the reason I say that is, we're talking about somehow replicating what he did last week. And that's why I tend to lean more towards he's probably not going to do that. Now, Brian, I give credit to Brian and Kirk, especially Brian, didn't give Deacon Hill enough rope to hang himself with. And Don Patterson kind of compared it to what they did with Joe Labus in the bowl game against Kentucky. Make it very simple, make the game plan simple, but can they execute? Are they going to be able to do that against this Illinois defense? Execute a simple game plan like they did against Rutgers last week? Because again, you're going to be looking at tape from a week ago against Rutgers or from this past Saturday. And I would think there's going to be some things that, Iowa runs naked so much. And Don has talked about that. Like, why aren't teams stopping the naked? It just doesn't make sense. So, man, I would think Brett and this defensive staff, I don't know Sonny, how involved do you think Brett Bielema is on a week-to-week basis with defensive game planning?
More so now compared to the beginning of the season. When Ryan Walters left for Purdue, Brett hired in-house. It was a former defensive backs coach, Aaron Henry. Aaron Henry played for Brett in Wisconsin during the Wisconsin days. So this is his first time at the level of defensive coordinator. So I'd imagine that, Brett, with his experience and the abundance of his experience being on the defensive end, helping Aaron out a lot. And we're a completely different team since essentially that Nebraska game, which pretty much everyone saw that Friday night where it's a 27 final, and Nebraska played awful and Illinois just played more awful. It was just, Illini Nation was down on its, we're feeling down on ourselves. We're questioning the Brett Bielema hire. But since then, we essentially played 4 games very well and just had one bad quarter. And that was the Wisconsin game, that fourth quarter where Johnny Newton was ejected at the beginning of the quarter. And we lost a 18-point lead in the fourth quarter to lose the game. Otherwise we'd have won 4 games in a row at this point. As you kind of talked about, like our defensive line, obviously led by Newton, he's the only player I've ever seen who's literally guarded by 3 guys almost every snap, and he doesn't take many snaps off. You saw that against Indiana, that the times he does take he goes off the field, the plays immediately run your running back straight at the tackle. Just take advantage of when he's gone. When he's back in, all right, find a different game plan. You talked about Witherspoon being gone, but he's not the only one. Illinois lost 3 defensive backs in the top 70 picks to the NFL. So we lost a lot of experience back there, and it was kind of replaced with freshmen and transfers, most of them being underclassmen. So, they're having some coverage issues. They're having some mistakes, and usually the way our game goes is whether our defensive line can get to the quarterback fast enough so that he doesn't have enough time to exploit the hole that our defensive backs will eventually, inevitably leave.
How much of how much have you seen as far as influence from Jim Leonhard this year?
I mean, it's hard to really know and quantify just because he is a defensive analyst. You know, he's with the program from Monday to Friday, and he's back home essentially scouting future opponents during the weekend. So he's never really interviewed. He's never really talked about when it comes to Brett mentioning him. So it's hard to really know. But you figure he's kind of just trying to associate himself with Brett and stay in the coaching game because he's going to want a job next year.
USC has probably already reached out to him potentially. He's home during the weekend. You don't think he's up in the press box somewhere?
He's not. No, he's not. He's the agreement that they have is he's in Champaign, he's in Champaign Monday to Friday, and then he gets the weekends. It's up to him whether he wants to go scout another opponent, but he's not there game day on Saturdays and Sundays.
That's interesting. So that's an Illinois approach then, Mark, to the analyst, because I'm pretty sure John Budmeyer, for instance, is up in the press box. I mean, I'm assuming. I know he trots out on the field. I know he's there on game days because he trots out in the field with Iowa pregame. So I'm surprised. I mean, maybe that's what it took to get him there.
Exactly. It might not be an Illinois thing. It might be a Jimmy Leonhard, hey, you want my services? Let me kind of dictate what I want to do this season.
Okay. Well, and that's, to me, that's a disadvantage. Now, I didn't know that until now, but when I heard Brett had landed Jim, I'm thinking, man, what an add to that defensive, especially with the departure of Ryan Walters. So, no, I'm going to be intrigued to see. Obviously, both these teams have different quarterbacks than what we saw a year ago. And both, I mean, I know Paddock has looked really good. Altmaier's went through his struggles just like Deacon Hill has. And, you brought up Johnny Newton. I mean, that guy, they're going to have an issue if they can't figure out a way to slow him down. Like, that's the one thing with Deacon Hill. We keep talking about his lack of mobility. How many games, Mark, have we seen, especially go back even into 21, even into 19, the interior of the line collapses. And if you have an immobile quarterback that can't flush, 4 o'clock or 9 o'clock and get out, make a spin move and get out, and throw out of the pocket, you're going to struggle. Even Nate Stanley went through those struggles, and Nate had more mobility than Deacon Hill did. So that's what would be concerning to me, is Deacon is very much dependent on either naked or a clean pocket. And so my guess is they're going to run a lot of naked. I would think that that's going to be well scouted by people like Jim Leonhard and Brett Bielema and that staff. But that's probably, the defensive backfield, the changes. Again, I haven't watched nearly to Sonny's extent of watching Illini football this year. But then, how does Iowa protect Deacon Hill? Because there's also not healthy up front. When Iowa's down, Logan Jones is likely out, their center. He didn't play. He played one drive this past Saturday. Tyler Ellsbury came in for him. Rusty Feth has been banged up. Bo Stevens is out again. And they have pieces in there to play. Connor Colby's played a lot of snaps. Like I mentioned, Ellsbury, Feth. Nick DeYoung, I think, is back. And he's going to probably factor in along with Richmond and then Dunker on the other side. But they're banged up just like everybody else is. So Johnny Newton's not the guy you want to go up against when you're already ailing in some regard.
Yeah, and our season is kind of turned around with the emergence of Caden Fagan. He's a 4-star running back that we had gotten. And once basically Reggie Love went down early in the season, Reggie Love was performing pretty much average as a running back. But Caden is a tank. And it took him like 80 some odd snaps before he had a negative yardage play. And he's been playing great. And then he got hurt in the first quarter of the last game against Indiana. And Reggie Love came in and he got 140 some odd yards. So it was nice to see Reggie Love do that. I just don't know if that was more of against an Indiana defense. But Caden, we have not had an update on injury-wise, whether he's going to be able to play on Saturday. And I think offensively, to keep your defense honest, like, we're going to need him there because, again, he's a big bruising running back. Illinois actually does have pretty good skill players. between Isaiah Williams, our quarterback room, whichever one starts, which Brett's not letting the cat out of the bag right now, and a couple of the other receivers and Caden, who I just mentioned. But if that running back, the running option is not being respected, then that means Luke Altmaier becomes our running back. And from what we've seen is from the first half of the season, when Luke is your main rushing guy, it's not going to bode well for us.
And correct me if I'm wrong, does Brett kind of move guys around? Because technically Newton's an edge guy, but he moves around, doesn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. He every snap he could be in a different spot.
Yeah, and who's the other guy? I know that Kirk was asked about it. Is it the transfer? Is it Daxon?
We had Keith Randolph.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking of Randolph.
The law firm was known as Newton and Randolph. We have Gabe Jackus, who was a former linebacker who wasn't really performing up to what he's used to. His expectations were. We've kind of moved him to the defensive line, and again, the results are being spoken for by the last 4 games, where we've kind of looked like the Illinois team that I thought we would. A good Big Ten West team. Now, obviously, the first 6 games tarnished what this season could have been. But, here we are at this point. We still, if we win out Saturday and against Northwestern, and Iowa loses out, and I think we can still make the Big Ten West, the championship, essentially. We would need Nebraska to beat Wisconsin and Nebraska to beat you guys. And if we win out, then somehow a team that Illinois fans gave up on about 6 weeks into the season could be representing the West because they hold the tiebreakers over the other teams.
Well, I gave up on them too, but shame on Illini fans. I'm not a fan. I just gave up on them. That is true. Yeah, you got this glut of 3 and 4 teams, and I was discounting the 3 and 4 teams that were down and jumped up. Everybody's looking at Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska because they were in contention. This is a mess, or could be. Iowa can obviously clean it all up and just win. But it will be a mess the final weekend of the season if Illinois wins this game.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's what this is a huge. I mean, it's easy to say, well, all Iowa has to do is win one of their last 2 games. It changes things. You lose this week, and then you got to go to Lincoln with all that pressure. They need to just need to win this week.
There will be people across the country, if Illinois would pull that off, that would be like, what? How in the world did that happen? Like, yeah, that's crazy that they're
including Illini fans. After that Nebraska game, the mood was very down. That's all I can say.